Let's look at taking an AutoCAD drawing and importing it into a Revit model. Typically we'll do this to either bring in a 2D AutoCAD drawing to use for an outline or a template for modeling, or in the case of what we're doing today is we're going to create a detail based on the AutoCAD detail, because a lot of offices will already have a library of AutoCAD details, and what we want to do eventually is create a library of Revit details. So starting off with, we're going to look at a drafting view. Now don't confuse that with a detail view. A detail view is when you take a portion of your current model, like a section through a roof wall connection or whatever, and then enhance it with some annotation tools. A drafting view is a view that is basically a blank piece of paper. So we can either use annotation tools to draw what we want, or we could take, in the case of what we're doing today, an AutoCAD drawing and import it, and then utilize that information. So first of all, let's go to the View ribbon, and you'll see drafting views right here. First of all, we're going to give this drafting view a name. So we're going to call this, because the AutoCAD file I have is called Roof Detail. So Roof Detail. And you're going to pick an initial scale. That can be almost anything, and depending on the scale of your detail, you're probably going to want to change the scale anyway. So I'm just going to accept the default. See how things like notes and hatching patterns look, and then we'll take it from there. Okay. First of all, I use the Modern Hotel file. I currently have that open, but actually the CAD detail I have has nothing to do with this particular model. You'll see that it has a gable roof, so let's just try to move past that. This is just an example. Having created a drafting view, if you go to your project browser, you're going to see that we now have a section called Drafting Views. And when you expand that, you'll see it says Roof Detail. So in our drafting view, we would go to the Insert ribbon and pick Import CAD. Now we wouldn't pick Link CAD because that will bring in the imagery of our CAD detail, and I suppose that would work if you're going to trace that information with annotation lines, but what we want to do is we want to import the CAD file so that we could then explode it and then convert the objects that make up that detail into Revit-based objects. Import CAD, and I have my file actually where is it? In a folder called Creating Details. And so in this particular insert dialog box, you'll see down here we have several options to choose from, unlike a lot of other insert dialog boxes. Number one, colors. So of course AutoCAD files have colors associated with the objects, either layers define the colors of an object, or the objects themselves can have specifically assigned colors. If this is set to preserve, then when you import that file, the colors are going to stay as they are. We want black and white for our purposes. So if you click on this drop-down list, you'll have invert, which will invert the colors. I've yet to see what the difference is for that, to be honest, but I suppose with some CAD files that's an option that works. We work with AutoCAD, so it doesn't seem to make much of a difference. Black and white will bring in all the entities in the AutoCAD file and make them either black or, well, the entities themselves become are imported as black. Layers/levels. So we can choose to select or cherry pick which levels are included or layers that are included in the importation. Now all means that all objects, regardless of whether a layer is frozen, thawed, on, off, are going to be imported. The term levels refers to another CAD program. Their version of layers is called levels. I think it's MicroStation, but I could be wrong with that. I don't use MicroStation, therefore. Here are the options. Visible. So if you select visible, that means the only thing that's going to be imported is in whatever layers happen to be on or thawed. And specify will bring up a dialog box once we click open in the bottom right hand side. It will give us a dialog box which lets us check off which layers we actually want to import. If it turns out the drawing we're importing has huge numbers of layers. So let's pick visible. Units. Well, it's going to make an assumption as to what the units of measure are between the AutoCAD drawing and our current model's drawing units. So I usually leave that as auto detect. The options there are to specify, okay, in AutoCAD, the number 1 represents feet, represents inches, represents meters, etc., etc., etc. Auto detect works best. If auto detect is wrong, then once you've imported the information into your drafting view, you're going to have to use the scale command to compensate for whatever the problem or mistake was made. Because AutoCAD is not the most perfect program, sometimes you're going to get horizontal lines, vertical lines that are not bang on horizontal and vertical. This checkbox means that if it determines, there's a sort of a threshold there, if it determines that a horizontal line isn't actually horizontal or a vertical line is not actually vertical, then it will make those adjustments for you. Positioning. Well, with positioning, we are bringing in an AutoCAD drawing. It has its own origin point. Our drafting view has its own internal, invisible origin point. So auto means it's going to synchronize the two and place that drafting, that imported CAD file to coincide with the origin of the drafting view. I usually prefer to pick manual center, manual center. The fact that it says manual means that it's going to give us the ability to use our mouse to determine where that detail is going to be placed. Place at top of footing. I believe that's an option where if we're importing the view into an actual, or the CAD file into an actual 3D view, we could determine where it's located vertically based on the levels in your Revit file. Let's click open. So here is our detail, and I can, because I used manual as an option for placing, I could use my mouse, place it right here. Let's take a look at this detail. This might look familiar. This is from a first year Revit chapter called Creating Details, or just detailing. I forget the name of the chapter. So anyway, it's about making modifications to that one is working in AutoCAD, I think, or Revit, to modify the objects to make them consistent with the project. Here's what I cannot stress enough. Any details created, the text, the hatching, all that information has to be consistent with the rest of the project. Take a look at the text in this particular insertion. We have text heights that are different. We actually have fonts that are different. Arrowheads are different. I'm going to make an assumption that the hatching pattern is not consistent. Take a look at the anchor bolt, or the bolt here. There is a hidden line, but the gap and the line segment are not consistent with the standards of this project. So first of all, what we're going to do is we're going to explode this. As you see, as I move my mouse around, the entire detail is one object. If I select it, then I will have a number of options to choose from. Bring to front, send to back. So if we're overlapping other geometry, we can move this forward or behind that other geometry, depending on the visibility desires. Detail layers. If you click on this, it's going to give you a list of all the layers that are associated with this inserted AutoCAD file. And we can actually click or check off one and click on OK, or multiple layers, and it will delete those layers and the objects that are on those layers. I hit cancel. Select that detail again, Then we have explode. Let me come back to that in a second. Query lets you pick something in the inserted AutoCAD file, and it will give you the information about it, such as what is it, what layer is it on, and so on. So click OK. Explode. Partial explode and full explode actually don't make any, there's no difference in what we're doing with this, but if we used a lot of blocks in this AutoCAD file, a partial explode will explode the inserted CAD file into its individual components, but it will not explode any blocks that make up the detail or the drawing. A full explode will break everything down, including blocks. So if you had a complex block in your AutoCAD file made up of 15 lines, partial explode means you'll still have an object that is created of 15 lines, but full explode will create 15 separate lines that you'll have to work with. I'm going to pick a partial explode, and visually you'll see there was a difference. Number one difference was that the text actually now matches what the default text style was, and usually the default text style is the style that you've been using all along for notes. You'll see that the hatching pattern is still a hatching pattern, which is great, but you'll see that lines, individual lines, are just that, they're individual lines. The arrows or the leaders are actually separate lines, and the arrowheads are separate objects. That's an issue. We're going to have to fix that. But first, talking about the matching of the standards. Let's take a look at this piece of text. It says GI flashing. Take a look in properties. It says text roof detail M aerial -1. It created a text style based on the existing properties of that text. Well, that style is not the standard for this particular detail. So we need to pick all the text. I'm just going to pick on this one so we can see what the difference is, and pick the appropriate text style. You're going to see something significant here, and that is the text is large. Well, remember that the scale of this detail view is defined by the scale in the bottom left corner of our view. We use the default ½ inch equals a foot. Well, obviously, when you look at this text, ½ inch equals a foot is too big or too large. So let's pick a different scale. 3/8 of an inch equals a foot. Oh, bad idea. Going in the wrong direction. So 3/4 of an inch equals a foot. Getting better. 1 inch equals a foot. That looks manageable. All the other text has to match. So I prefer to use match properties. So I'll go to the modify ribbon, pick match properties. I'll pick this text as the good text. And I'm going to pick each individual piece of text. And yes, there will be overlap because remember, a block of text has a left and right margin. So now that I've updated all that text, what I could do is hit the escape key a couple times, pick the text that's overlapping, use these grips, and drag out the width to something that is not only appropriate, but fits. Now these ones here are very close to each other. I'm going to just move them further apart. Move that one a little more. That. Move that one down a little bit. Please note, none of the leader lines have adjusted. We have to delete those. So I'm going to select those leader lines because remember, we used partial explode, so they're not one object, there's several objects. I'm going to pick one arrowhead here, right click, select all instances visible in view, and then hit the delete key so we can get rid of all those at the same time. What can we do with Revit-based text? Well, we can select it, and in properties we can add in a leader. So we're basically going to go through and do that. We're going to add in those leaders, make adjustments to them. This one is the nailer, add a leader. Let's point this to here. The default here is that the leader line lines up with the bottom of the text. I like to have it centered personally when you have a multi-line piece of text, or a lot of people I've seen like to have it lined up with the top piece of text. So either will work. Can't strip. That's this right here. I wish there was a way to snap horizontally to these leader lines, but it doesn't seem to be that way. This one here, stop leader. Well, it looks like it did snap, so maybe I'm just not being patient. Let me lower this a little more. I'm making sure when I'm moving text, the alignment line, make sure the text, using alignment lines, that the text actually lines up with each other. All right, so the insulation is here. And then we've got this one, which is the concrete deck over metal decking, or lightweight concrete over metal decking. Like so. Now, if you look at all the line objects, they are all thin lines. So that's not going to work. We're going to need to make some adjustments. And I'm only going to pick on the flashing right now, but you'd have to go through the entire detail and make these changes. Let's pick this line right here. If you look under properties, it says lines heavy, line style heavy. Up here it says line style heavy, but obviously heavy isn't actually heavy. We have some existing line styles. A standard template would probably have different names for them, but if we pick wide lines, now it looks like flashing. So we can go through and pick our lines. And make those adjustments. You will have to do that. Whoops, missed one. I could use match properties as well. So you're going to have to go through this, this detail and make all the necessary adjustments for line weights based on whatever the project standard is going to be. So all the objects that were imported into this drafting view brought in with them many styles. If we look at hatching patterns, if we select this, you'll see the hatching pattern is a fill object or a filled region. And what we can do is we can change that to something else, something standard. Let's see. Let's say it's concrete. And let's see. Oops, let me just check here. Hit type. Where are you, concrete? See, concrete is not here, so let's look at drafting view. Of course, drafting view, concrete. There we go. Yeah, it looks pretty heavy. You may have noticed that with that style, we have a line weight. So if you change that to 1, remember line weights in Revit go from 1 to 16, thin to thick. So let's take a look at this. We'll hit apply. That looks better. And so on and so on. So we'd keep adding, enhancing, changing, adding new things to the detail as required. because every project's different. All the objects that make up the assembly are going to vary. And this is where you're going to make the changes to that. Now that we've got that detail created, if we look at our sheets, roof details. So we have a sheet defined for roof details, and just like any other view, we click and drag right onto the sheet. And there it is. So one last thing I'm going to leave you with, and that is one very important aspect of details is to create detail libraries. You don't want to have to keep going through importing CAD files, making all the modifications every single time you're going to use a CAD detail. We may want to use this particular detail for future projects. And in that situation, what we'll do is, rather than import the CAD file and make the changes, etc., we can actually save this detail as its own a Revit file and then import it later on in other projects if we want. See, it's already been modified to Revit standards. So if we go to the File, hold down menu, and you'll see we have Export. And actually, that's the wrong option to choose from. What we're going to do is Save As. Now, on the list of Save As, we've always used Project, but we want to save a current project with a different name. But you'll see we have Library here, Family, Group, View. That's what we want, is View. We're going to see a list of all the views in our current model. We get to pick and choose which views we want to export. Each one will be given its own individual name. So I want to save this view. So I checked off Drafting View Roof Detail. I clicked OK. And off the screen here, I've got my dialog box. It says Save As. Create a folder for just your details so you always know where to find them. So I created a folder called Detail Library. It's using the view name as the file name. I click Save. So now that view is its own individual Revit file that I can then go back and import in future projects. And that is it. That's how you import an AutoCAD file, modify it to suit your project standard, place it on a sheet, and save it as its own detail.